Leandro Herrero. Dr. Leandro Herrero is both a clinical psychiatrist and an acclaimed author. He held many senior management positions in global pharmaceutical companies before dedicating himself to communications. Dr. Herrero is CEO and co-founder of the Chalfont Project, an international consulting firm of organizational architects which works with organizations of many kinds in strategy and communications. He is the author of several psychiatric and scientific publications and writes books as well as regular columns. After having worked many years throughout Europe and the U.S., Dr. Herrero now lives with his family in England. Please give another warm round of applause to Dr. Leandro Herrero.
I have nothing to do with this introduction. This is being cooked by somebody somewhere, and it's very flattering, very nice. Thanks very much. Thanks for inviting me. Yeah, I'm going to talk about the age of activism, and Karen usually told before, that's what Time magazine said. I think they got it completely wrong. It goes well beyond that. It's the age of activism. Protesting is one thing, being an activist is another thing. And what we are seeing is a massive increase on the new even terminology around activism. The old activism of unions, which by the way in many countries is the only thing that seems to correlate with activism, like in other countries, political activism, there is no other form of activism. But new forms like collectivism and social activism people are talking about that more and more. What's going on there? Well, there are some commonalities on these mechanisms, and there are at least these 5 for a social movement, for the modern social movement. It looks sometimes like it's leaderless. It's not necessarily like that, but it's a significant element of self-managing there. Technology certainly helps and has accelerated the connectivity between people. This is very clear. There is a cause, or sometimes causes, and it's interesting how the causes converge, sometimes with getting people together from areas who you wouldn't thought that they would never be together, so very strange fellow travelers getting together sometimes for a cause. There is a great element of social coping and imitation, which is the area that I'm very interested in, and it creates some sort of critical mass which creates emergent properties, meaning at some point what's going on is even very difficult to predict because it's an emergent phenomenon of critical mass creating other critical masses. One phenomenon I'm very interested in is the social copying and imitation, which is the one I'm talking to you a little bit today. I think my suggestion to you is that we have completely underestimated inside the organization, in the world, this your world, and most my world, the power of social copying and influence. We know it's there, we say it's there, yes, role modeling has always been there, and we talk about that, but we haven't got a clue how these things happen inside the organization and to our peril. And yes, technology is obvious that is helping, and we see that all over the place. There is no question about that, although there is uncertainty still about how much technology per se is triggering things versus just being a vehicle for accelerating the social movement. Sometimes it's pretty obvious that even one single person can do extraordinary things with just a little bit of technology, like in recent days in Egypt. So we know all that. Technology is there. I'm not going to talk about technology. I'm going to talk about how the process of activism has some commonalities which starts like that. Individuals saying, I can do this. I want to do this. I can be in charge. Maybe I feel I'm in charge. Maybe I'm going to take charge. That's number one. Second is, other people are doing this. I can see that happening. It's happening. Third is, I'm going to do it, I'm acting, I'm doing something very specific. And the fourth is, what about you, by the way? Could you come with me and doing together and engage other people? So there are different elements there. One starts with self-belief. If there is no self-belief, it's unlikely that the circle continues. The second is a social copying. You can see things happening, and this is what technology brings on your screen the fact that is already happening versus something that may happen, then you can have behaviors because some people are doing something. It's not about theory, it's not about thinking of doing, it's about doing. We in organizations spend about 95% of the time thinking of doing and 5% of the time doing or planning for doing versus doing. And finally is activism, which means people are doing something. That circle is pretty constant. Now, for you, probably most of you, I don't know, without knowing any more of anything of what's coming next, you would think I am referring to the external world. Well, I'm not. I'm referring to both the internal and the external world, the internal world in the organization and the external world. Because my suggestion to you is that there is no difference whatsoever between the internal social change that organization needs to have and the external world. The mechanisms are the same. Business and organizations have been very, very good at ring-fencing themselves and thinking that what happens on 9 to 5 or now 24/7 in the BlackBerry area is something that is very special to the organization, very special to business. Then when they go home and switch on the television screens, stuff happens there and say, okay, that's life, that's different thing. But in my 9 to 5 world, we have different rules, different things, and we are just different. You may have noticed that perfectly reasonable citizens in the evening talking to their families in a normal language become, at 9 o'clock in the morning the following day, very strange guys speaking weird language that nobody understands and very unreasonable. They're called managers. And we think that the worlds are very different, and therefore, yeah, all this stuff on TV is great, etc. But, you know, we have our own SOPs, our own things to do it inside the organization, our own change management, and we are just different. To your peril, if you think like that, because all the ingredients of the questions that people need to ask themselves about how social change happens inside or outside organizations are basically the same. The role of the informal organization versus formal, the role of the top-down versus a distributed leadership, the role of stories, all that you know, and some of you are very experts on that, are exactly the same. The world is the same, homo imitans is the same inside organizations and outside organizations. But we are not doing very well inside. About 75% plus of so-called change management programs fail. If you apply that rate to anything else that happens in organizations, you wouldn't be in business. You wouldn't put up with that 70% downtime in your IT systems, or 70% failure in recruiting, or any other thing that you can think of. But we are very happy to accept that in management of change, 75% plus is okay, and people still keep their jobs. And the reason why this is happening is because we don't understand the world that we are, the world that we have around us. That seems a world that is complex, yes, and it's a combination of messages, communications, stories that you are the experts of, and people doing stuff. It's a complex world, which I suggest to you that in reality is a combination of two very different worlds, and this is the key to the failure or the key to the success. And these different worlds are one which I call world one, which is the world where the currency is information. And information is something that goes down the pipes, that you push down, follows very much a hierarchical system, more or less, and that's fine. It's a repetitive world. We use the terminology cascade down, you and I and everybody, so it's a push world. We push information down, and it's a world which seems to work for things like education, sensitizing people, sending messages, training, and I would suggest that 99.9% of the world of management is there. If you tell me how you spend your 9 to 5 time, I would say that probably most of us in this room spend most of the time in world one, in the world of information. But there is a completely different world, which is world two. And world two is the world where the currency is behaviors. And behaviors is something that people exhibit. Behaviors don't go down in PowerPoints. Behaviors hate PowerPoints. You don't present behaviors, you present concepts, but it's not a behavior until somebody is doing something in a very clear way. Behaviors are copied, are imitated. Look at kids in the playground, that's what they do. Therefore, it's a pull world, very different, because with my behavior, I'm pulling others, whether I like it or not, whether I'm conscious or not, to behave in the same way, and certainly my behavior is pulled by the behaviors I see around in the organization. And you see that all the time. The world of unwritten rules is far more important than all the combination of SOPs that you can have in organization. In this world, pull world, the social network, how people are connected with each other, is far more important than in world one. And it's a world in which sometimes I use the analogy of a mountain on fire. You have a little fire there, a little fire there, a little fire there, and suddenly the mountain is on fire. And when the mountain is on fire, you don't know anymore whether it started with 1 fire, 3 fires, or even the quality of the trees. The mountain is on fire, and that's how change happens. And we can orchestrate that, so this is the world where behavioral change takes place, ways of doing, cultural change, anything that has to do with the world of ways of doing is in world two. And the main problem we have in organizations, and is still there, is that we falsely attribute to world one characteristics and powers that it hasn't. For example, that information is going to create behavioral change. World one creates world one outcomes, and world two creates world two outcomes. Information does not create behavioral change, but we think that it does, and therefore we spend quite a lot of time in world one pretending that this is happening. Another important difference between world one and world two are the mathematics. In world one, you start probably aiming to everybody in the organization, maybe with a communication system, and you know very well that some people pay attention. From the people who pay attention, some people start thinking of doing something, and at the end there is a little bubble at the bottom with people doing something as a result of that. It's a world of attrition. Does it sound familiar to you? If it's not, you are in the wrong place, you are in the wrong conference, you have the wrong titles. This is how it works. World two, you start sometimes with a very small number of individuals doing something, other people copy that, you create critical masses, other people copy that, and eventually everybody does things in a particular way. It's a world of a scale up. Whether it's good or bad, I'm not making any moral judgment yet. I'm saying this is how it is, the worlds are different. And therefore, anybody who can master the plus in the middle is in the good position, and I suggest to you that we don't know how to do it because we are spending most of the time in the romantic and lovely landscape of world one, which is the world that we know how to do, and we think that the world two is something kind of happens there, but we don't know what to do with that. And the ingredients of each world are completely different. In world one, the ingredients of the cooking have to do with information and the hierarchical channels and the cascade down, which you've seen many million times. But in world two, they are completely different. They are behaviors, it's influence, it's peer-to-peer, it's stories, it's other kind of leadership. I don't have the time to go into detail on that, but I'm saying the worlds are different, and attributing something of one world to another is a tremendous mistake that we need to avoid. Management of change looks very different as well. In world one, you do information dictation at the top-down communication programs, you go all hierarchical layers, and you have the traditional change outcomes, which we know that are not very good, and also you can pray as well, which also will help trying to create something there. And in world two, in viral change, as we call it, you have a relatively small number of behaviors that are going to be spread by a relatively small number of individuals through informal social networks. A little bit more about that in a second. Let me share with you now 7 inconvenient truths around social activism, whether they are inside organization or outside organization, with a little bit of bias to inside organization, which is about 85% of my work in daily life, like you inside business organizations. Number 1, communication is not change. I know you won't invite me again. It's been very nice meeting you, and Brussels is lovely, but thanks for your hospitality. Cultures are not created by training. Workshops don't create change. Away days and offsites are very nice, but do not create change. I'm very sorry to say that for people who thought the otherwise, but that's how it is. That's an inconvenient truth, and you can ignore it, or you can do something about it if you want. Number two, there is no change unless there is behavioral change. You can kill yourself changing things in organization, new processes, reporting lines, new silos, other silos, old silos. Nothing will change when people carry on doing things as before, which you know that most of the time this is what happens. And it's about doing, it's about not thinking for change, it's about doing that. And it's about sustaining behaviors, not about triggering behaviors. Triggering behaviors is the easy part. The so-called nudge approach and nudge theory, which is very much loved by the UK government at the moment, or less and less because it's not delivering much, is about triggering things, influencing people to do something, but they haven't got a clue what to do to sustain that. So triggering is easy. We all can trigger behaviors in one afternoon. The question is how to sustain that. Number three, social change is pull, is no push. So knowing who has the greatest power for pull is going to matter, certainly. And there we have lots of myths, including the fact that the leadership role model, the pull power that they have, is great, is completely overrated, and it's about time that we say there are other people with more power in the organization. As far as behavioral copying, people don't want to hear that. It's about peer-to-peer, it's tribal, it's horizontal networks. It's something that Edelman knows very well, and I missed the session yesterday. Some people told me that there was a great session on the Edelman Trust Barometer. Great data every year that they are doing. Please, Mr. Edelman, keep doing that every year. It's great. And you know that with some difference between years, the number one category, certainly inside the organization, where people find the level of trust is what they call people like me, meaning you, me, people who send kids to the same schools, talk about football, trust each other. You may be a manager, I may be not, doesn't really matter, but it's this horizontal tribe that if you think or do something, I'm going to pay attention, maybe unconsciously, because I kind of trust you. I have no idea why, but that's how it is, versus I trust less people at the top. So here it is in the organization. We have all these top-down tsunamis that are bombarding or raining in the organization top-down, from the management systems, from your internal comms, OD, etc., etc. That's all very well. That's the push tsunami that we see every day. But we are forgetting that the people like me work in a different direction. It's about peer-to-peer, it's about horizontal networks, it's about informal networks, it's about tribes. These are the people like me. The difference between today and maybe 5 years ago is that 5 years ago people would have said, oh yeah, that's very interesting, that's very good, thank you, next, I don't know what to do with that. Today we are doing things about that. My daily work, my day work is about orchestrating peer-to-peer movements. So it's doable, you can do it, it's not just an anecdote. So that's inside the organization, and certainly we do that. We put peers together and we help them and training that I say in traditional World 1 how to work in World 2. And it works across cultures. People understand the peer-to-peer very well wherever you are. This is in Nigeria, works exactly the same. And certainly we also train people for the technology. For example, in that case, a session on training peers and champions to use Jammer inside a particular organization. What about outside the organization, in the macro-social world? Exactly the same. We think that bombarding the tsunamis with the community leaders, the politicians, religious leaders, authorities, social workers, etc., that's how it works. These people are hardly people like me, are they? They are the authorities. Therefore, what is missing is the horizontal, patient-to-patient, youth-to-youth, gun-to-gun, community organizer to community organizer, family to family, and we are doing works on dysfunctional families in this way. If you have dysfunctional families that you want to change that, you need to have ex-dysfunctional families working with them, not the social workers, and certainly not the religious leaders. Some people have understood that very well. This is Chicago's ceasefire program, extremely successful, 42% reduction of violence in the streets of Chicago, where the program is is done, and guess who this guy in the middle is trying to stop gangs shooting each other? Is an ex-gang person. It's not the priest, it's not the imam, it's not the head of communications of the system. Well, it doesn't look like a head of communications to me, but that's another thing. Patients like me, another side that is growing, same concept, nothing to do with that, where people are going there as a first pass of trying to understand what's going on and trusting your people like me. In my latest book, I use the phrase, youth to youth, granny to granny, to make the point that is that horizontal element that we need to master, and we need to do that inside the organization big time. Number 4. Social change, both macro, micro, is viral or it isn't. It's about infection. We are infecting others with our behaviors. It's about orchestrating that. If you want to be in the change business, you are in the infection business, not in the broadcasting business. The broadcasting business does not create infections, that creates little bubbles that you have to repeat from time to time. The model is epidemiology, learn epidemiology. There is no difference between, by the way, between biological infection, social infection, idea infection, or behavioral infection. So drop the MBA, learn epidemiology, and I think you'll be better off as communicators and heads of whatever. Number 5. Interesting, there is the word act inside activism. So there is about acting, it's about doing something, and connectivity, which is what people care about, has nothing to do with collaboration. Some people are very connected and they don't collaborate at all. We have mistaken these two words. Clicktivism, say I like that, I click that, is nothing to do with activism. And people, some people have painfully learn about that when you have hundreds of thousands that I like you, but if you are in the fundraising, you may have just a few dollars, because one thing is to like somebody, another thing is to do something or put the money on to do some activity. Advocacy, which we all care about and we love, is nothing to do with activism. Advocacy is the easy part. I can be an advocate and have a microphone and say this is extraordinarily good, we all should do something, but I'm not doing anything. I want activists, I want people who are acting and doing something, and the old walk the talk for me is talk the walk. I prefer people who walk and then talk about how the walk was than the other way around. Number 6, employee engagement. Employee engagement is not employee bombardment. And it's a sophisticated telling is not employee engagement. It's not about when you do more surveys and more top-down communications and more things like that. It looks sometimes like management engagement, but certainly no employee engagement. Managers are very busy doing that, but employees are not necessarily engaged. The ultimate goal of employee engagement, ladies and gentlemen, is self-management. I know, it's naive, it's stupid, it's not happening, and we are not in this world, but I can promise you that we are going in that direction. It may not happen tomorrow, but it will be foolish to ignore that. So at the same time, the ultimate goal of the total employee commitment, which is something that I know you care about, is to have a company of volunteers. It doesn't get better than a company of volunteers. If you could think of that, on how to master a company of voluntarism, we would be better off across organizations. And I'm going to make an important announcement. It's an announcement about the next revolution, and the next revolution is employee engagement. I just announced that today in Brussels, so it's an historical day. It's going to happen. It won't be televised. It won't be Twitter. It just happened. And it has nothing to do with allowing green stuff going on inside the organization. Some people say, yeah, we have employee activism. You know, we have all these greens and no greens and the yellows and other causes that we allow them to use the organization and the internal social networks. Look how wonderful we are. So this employee activism. No, that's the same activism that they have outside the organization. They've just been allowed to be inside the organization. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about people taking charge, self-manage, and take over many things that I don't know, maybe instead of Occupy Wall Street, it's Occupy my company. I know, it's too many Belgian beers, but I just announced in the revolution just now, just in case. Number 7, social movement is backstage leadership. The traditional leadership, which is top-down with the slides, as I'm doing here now, is not something that is going to create a social movement. Invisible leadership is something that our leaders need to master. They don't like them. You don't like it. I don't like it sometimes, but it's how it is. It's about backstage. It's about backing off and supporting the peer-to-peer, supporting the community of champions, or whatever you want to call it. Supporting doesn't mean dictating, it means allowing, orchestrating, building, but not controlling what's happening there. It's tough, it's different, and some people have already asked me in the corridor, even before I present the slides, how many people are doing that? Well, a few they are doing. Is this science fiction? Well, it was maybe a few years ago. Believe me, it's not now. People are going in that direction. Is every single company in the world going there? Absolutely no. You know that, and I know that as well, but that doesn't mean that we don't look into, try to understand whether our models of leadership, the traditional ones, are the ones that are going to be valid for the next part of life in our organizations. And the question I'm going to leave with you is, are we ready for all this stuff? Is your function, my consulting, your functions and your titles and things that you do, are we ready for a pool where social activism is the way to do it and is what is happening? A world that is complex and different. Are we ready for the understanding and the mastering that the informal organization is more important than the formal organization? The stuff happens, the real neat, good stuff happens in the informal organization, informal social networks. You know that, I know that. But all your tools, kits, all the things you do is for the formal organization, most of the time, and I do the same. So we are spending all the time, energy, training, teaching, etc., on the formal organization and creating more committees, teams, meetings, and things like that, when we know that the real stuff doesn't happen there. Very interesting. Are we ready for peer-to-peer orchestration versus the hierarchical, which is less important as far as culture is concerned? Do we understand that networking, means navigating the network and connectivity, is far more important than teamwork? Teamwork is overrated. We have enough teams. Stop having more teams. We need teaming up, but we don't need teams. You remember the old thing that the old CEO of Citicorp used to say many years ago, banking is needed, banks are not. It's exactly the same, by the way. Your function is not needed, heads of communications. Your functionality is, but your function is not needed. So the same, teaming up and collaborating and getting together is needed. Teams are not. Networks are. Are we ready for a broker type of leadership, which is a backstage more than the traditional top-down? Are you doing anything about it? Are we ready and prepared for the narratives and the stories, which I know is very popular now, and I know many people are experts on that more than the corporate that. Are we ready for a world of interdependence when virtually nothing in any organization can be done which is completely independent and doesn't depend from other people's roles, jobs, ways of doing things? And are we ready for things like the ant strategies versus the old strategy? That's a very old thing. You know, remember the old strategy used to be called the tyranny of the or. We were told that you can have quality or speed. If you want speed, quality is going to be crap. If you want quality, it's going to be very slow. Now, that is gone, because we have the and strategies today. We want both, we need both, and we need fast. And it's a world with more and more ambiguity. Are we ready? Do we know how to navigate that? And that's a question I'm asking to you, where everything I see, feel, smell, hear, and work with in the communications area that you are is very much on the structural side, on the predictable and more or less fixed part of the organization, the formal organization, which is the one that, nothing wrong with that, with it, it's just that the stuff happens somewhere else. I haven't told you what I'm doing for a living on my business card. This is what I do. So other than pontificating like I'm doing now on a typical World One with some slides here in Brussels over a couple of beers, my time is not about writing books, which I do, or about giving speeches, which I do. It's about orchestrating peer-to-peer grassroots movements inside organizations. In other words, the message is it can be done. This is not esoteric. This is not a theory. This is not something that we know it's there, but we know how to do it. It can be done. It needs to be orchestrated and created and crafted in the same way that many years ago we were doing in the traditional, formal, top-down organization. And you can Google anything you want, and you'll find me somewhere. He knows where I am. And I will be interested to continue on having a conversation with you on these things anytime, anywhere. Maybe no Brussels because you won't invite me again, but maybe other places. Margaret Mead, the anthropologist, said it all many years ago when she said, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has." If we just could remember this in our day-to-day world of communications and change in organizations, that these small numbers of individuals who can change the world, our internal world, our external world, we will be better off. A small number of individuals. Thanks very much.
Well, thank you very much to Dr. Leandro Herrero for a very provocative presentation. I'm going to bring him over here to the Kuschelecke, the question corner here. And
I didn't realize you were coming as well.
Well, you're still in Brussels, so we can continue this discussion because we maybe don't have to invite you back, but you're still here. So whilst you're still here, I'm going to open up first to the floor. We are a little tight for time again today for obvious reasons, so if people have questions that they'd like to direct to Dr. Herrero immediately, I have a couple, but I'd like to give you first opportunity. So we have some girls running around with microphones. Do I see any hands going up? Yes, over here. Over here? Over there? Yeah. Get a microphone over there.
What do you think drives the persistence of World War I thinking? Is it just inertia? Is it just people holding on to their roles? Or is short-termism in particular a real cause of this?
Maybe the latter. Can you hear me? Yes to all. I mean, there's nothing intrinsically wrong with World War I. It's how it is. It's just that we think that it's the only world. And because we know how to do it, and we feel comfortable on preparing packages and sending messages and measuring that and the other, so it's a comfortable world to be in. It's more uncomfortable for people who are not used to that to do it, to jump to a very different world, which things work in a different way. So yes, in part it's inertia, in part is a territory where people feel confident, in part there is an expectation that you need that and more of that. How many times have we heard communication? Well, you are experts in communications and you know very well that at the third or fourth time that you do the same communication, the effect is people switching off. And if you don't know that, you shouldn't be here in the audience. So there is something about World War I that it has limitations. All my point is to look at the limitations versus thinking that they haven't, or okay, we can manage with that and that's okay. So all of the above probably is there. But people are moving more and more to other things and trying to understand that for every push, you need a pull. And that's the message. When I say that sometimes with top leaders, they say, oh yeah, we do that. I mean, we push things and then our direct reports will pull it. No, your direct reports keep pushing down. They push to the next level and to the next level. It's a continuous cascade, tsunami of messages. But that's not pull. Nobody's really pulling that because pulling is multiplying. It's starting with the small people coping, getting critical masses, and getting an internal social movement. It's an inverse pyramid, it's an inverse mathematics.
Any other questions for the moment? Yes, I can see the hands going up. The lady in the back here first.
Thank you, and thank you for that truly inspiring presentation. For those of us who operate in World I, what are the 2 or 3 steps that you would recommend we take to start to move to World II?
The 2 or 3 things, I didn't catch the question completely. I know most of you who spend the time in World I.
The 2 or 3 steps that you would recommend to start moving towards World II.
All right, okay, very simple. For example, one by one, in the world of influence, Starting being sensitive and mastering, understanding the kind of influence that is inside the organization. For example, segmenting influence inside the organization. I do sometimes in some exercises with people. It sounds like a very trivial thing to do, and we always stay for an hour because people see, this is rich. We thought that we have hierarchical influence, the authorities, and then the scientific influence, and the communicators, and now we can start almost allocating names to this kind of influence. We say we are rich on influence. We don't know what to do with that, but at the very least we are rich. And then from that trying to see who of these groups or segments will have a greater power for what. Because if you are in a scientific and technical organization, as I spent many times of my life, the technical influence, the experts are there, and therefore you can't ignore them. But they are not necessarily the best for pulling behaviors around, because there are other people who do that better. So understanding the different components, going almost one by one, and trying to see what would it take for me to understand, move, that would be my starting point. Behavior is the same. Everybody says, oh, we have behaviors, we know behaviors. What the fuss about that was, most of the time, what you see is popular psychology, folk psychology, which doesn't make any sense when you go in the organization. So you wouldn't treat finance in your organization in the same light way as we treat behaviors. Everybody seems to know about that, but etc. So there is no magic formula, but just take each of the ingredients and say, how can I move? How can I learn? How my team and I can get into that. It may take a little bit of time, may start just with awareness, understanding. Then you are already then, at least, at the very least, progressing in that way and taking account of the richness of the pool world too, which if you don't do that, it will get probably, as you say, taken over easily by the day-to-day busyness of World 1.
Thank you very much. I'm going to stop there for now, so hang on to the rest of your questions because we do have to get to our next speakers. Thank you very much, Dr. Herrero.